So, Elizabeth, welcome to this podcast. Nice to have you here.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So this is the rest of the people who are watching and those who are just listening. We are in warm and sunny Copenhagen, about mid-May, and we're on day 2 of the IAP training. We'll talk more about that later. So just give us the sort of the metadata of who you are, your age, and all of the things we talked about.
Sure. My name is Elizabeth dos Santos, and I am 57 years old, which is younger. Oh, no, it is.
Older than me.
I'm older
Always.
than you. Shoot, I forgot again. So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri in the United States, and I went to college in Trinity University, which is in Texas. I got my master's degree, and I am ABD, PhD from the University of Texas at Austin in government. And in between college and graduate school, I spent a little time at the Department of State and as a administrative person for one of the principal deputy assistant secretaries there. And then after graduate school, I ended up at the FBI. So I spent quite a long time there. About 24, just shy of 25 years. And then joined First & Associates, where I've done curriculum development and instruction since my early retirement in 2020.
Tell us a little bit more on how you got into intelligence and sort of how was that journey into intelligence?
Wow. Well, I was working on my dissertation. I was living in Washington, D.C. with my parents as a poor graduate student. And I'd done, sporadic trips to France, which was related to my dissertation. And I came home one day and my dad had cut an advertisement out of the Washington Post. And the advertisement was for an intelligence analyst for terrorism at the FBI. And I said, Dad, I don't know anything about law enforcement or anything like that. I don't know anything about terrorism. I don't know why the FBI would want me. And my dad said, what they're looking for is analysts. And you're a good thinker and you are good at analysis. You're good at writing. Think you'd be a great fit. And I'm like, I'm really not sure that's what I want to do. And he said, you know what? It's good practice. So just go ahead and get stuff down. So the first thing they do is they send you this questionnaire. It's a standard form and it is long and it's basically your entire life story. I was like, really, do you think I need to, go forward this? And Dad's like, you know what? You'll have it all in one place. It'll be helpful for later. It's good to have, all your bio data just kind of in one place. So I filled it out and I sent it in. And then they sent me something called I think it was the KSA. So it was like knowledge, skills, and abilities. So you kind of filled out the form. I looked at it, I'm like, I do so much writing anyway, working on my dissertation, and he's like, you know what, you should go ahead and do it. It's good practice. I'm like, okay. So I send that in, and the next letter I get is something that says, hey, we'd like you to come down for an interview. And I'm like, that sounds kind of scary, going to the FBI for an interview. I'm not sure I want to do that. It's good practice. You practice your interview skills, your interpersonal relationship skills. These are good things. So I go down and it's a kind of a scary panel interview. I thought it was going to be like a one-on-one chat. No, it was not. But, it was fun. It was interesting. There were maybe 4 or 5 people there on the panel. So I went away thinking, okay, well, that was a good experience. The next thing they said, well, we want you to take a drug test. I'm like, okay. I mean, I have never done drugs, so that was not terribly stressful. So I go down and take a drug test. The next thing I get is something saying, hey, we want you to come in for a polygraph test. I'm like, polygraph test? Are you kidding me? Like, I don't want to take a polygraph test. That's like for criminals and stuff like that. I don't want to do that. So my dad's like, you know what? This is going to be a great story to tell at a party. And, there are not that many people who've taken a polygraph test. So why don't you go ahead and do it? So I did it. And yeah, it was really nerve-wracking. And so I go home afterwards and I'm like, oh, I'm glad I don't ever have to do one of those again. So the next letter I get was, congratulations, we've been hired by the FBI. You have a report date of September 3rd. I'm like, wait, what just happened here? And that's literally how I got into intelligence. They did not tell me what I was going to be working on until probably day 2 when I was there. And then so was international terrorism, which honestly I didn't know anything about at the time. But I really liked the mission of serving people. I liked the idea of a noble position, which there are not that many out there where you're really helping people. And so instead of it being kind of the bridge job of 2 to 3 years, I ended up staying almost 25.
That's a great story into probably my next question is, did you want to be an intelligence officer when you were young, or what was your dreams when you were younger?
So what I really wanted to be was an Indian princess, but that didn't work out.
Didn't we all?
Right? And then the next thing I really wanted to be was a flight attendant, because I love to travel, still love to travel, which is one of the reasons I love being here in Denmark. I think when I started graduate school, I thought about becoming a college professor. And then I was a teaching assistant in one of the big, kind of poli-sci 101 classes and thought, gosh, I'm not sure that this is my dream job after all. And so I didn't have, I certainly didn't dream of being an intel officer. I didn't even think about the intelligence community at all as I was going through kind of my academic, stage. But I have to say that once I got to the Bureau, I loved intelligence. Now, when I arrived, we were pretty new at the whole intelligence thing. Being a heavily law enforcement organization, it was really a push to add that intelligence component and make it, not that there weren't analysts, there were, and there were some really good ones, but they were few and far between. There were not nearly enough to kind of cover the breadth of what the Bureau was looking at. So I was very fortunate to have a couple of mentors who kind of shepherd me through, and along with the organization, I learned intel on the job for sure.
Yeah. And when you first started, what was sort of you said counter-terrorism, but how did that develop over the years, and what type of roles did you get into, and how did that happen?
Yeah, so I started at the Bureau literally not knowing. I knew it was going to be counter-terrorism, but I didn't know whether it was going to be domestic terrorism or international terrorism. I did have some background with international travel, and my dissertation was also internationally focused. So they did decide to put me into the international part. But I didn't know anything about international terrorism at the time. So there was a real learning curve. And I very much enjoyed it, but there there were some heartaches on the way. I'll never forget my first presentation. So they asked some of us at headquarters to go to a conference of FBI agents that were there to learn about terrorism in, I think it was California. So we're all out in Los Angeles, and I had, I was very nervous. It was my very first kind of big presentation, and I wrote out what I was going to say, word for word.
I've done the same many times.
I crashed and burned. Not only did I write
I did not do that.
I did. So not only did I read it word for word, I tried to be funny. And I'm just not funny. I appreciate humor, but like intrinsically, I'm not a funny person. So it was like the feedback was scathing. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to fire me because of this presentation. And I look back at how I felt after that moment, and I knew I could have gone down and just like been completely obliterated by it, or I could actually use the feedback and come out, sharp the next time. So it really taught me some lessons about myself, what kind of analyst presenter I was meant to be. And clearly reading from a book or, a prepared talk was not me. So I learned to take notes. I use notes all the time. I'm using notes today. That's kind of my style. And I think that's part of kind of a development as an analyst, is figuring out what your own kind of natural style is. So,
and I would also say, and you sort of embodied this, presentation isn't for everyone. And you have to have either the background and skills for it, or at least learn and how to do it over time, right? So your first time you said you crashed and burned. I get that, and that hurts. But that gives so much weight in your baggage for later. So you learn so much about it. You learn about yourself, about people, how to engage with people, and actually how to present material in a good way. So I admire the fact that you actually said, okay, I'm going to, do my best to actually get better at it.
Yeah. Practice is a huge part of it too. And
Absolutely.
just, when you've done a lot of presenting, you get used to it. And for me, I'm an introvert at heart. So I have a persona that I put on, and that's part of, kind of the presentation. Do I think it makes me fake? No, that's just another aspect of my own personality. And I think as an analyst, it's really important to be engaging, because that's part of the communication that you have with your client. If you can't communicate well with them, if you can't hold their attention, it's awfully hard to make your analytic points.
I agree. And going from, the first time you did a presentation, you probably grew up in the FBI, as I said. And did you get any other, exciting roles or responsibilities, or did you stay in counter-terrorism all the time?
Well, actually, so I guess it was about 2000. I went to work at the legal attaché office in Paris. And the legal attaché is just kind of the fancy word for the FBI overseas. It was primarily an administrative role, but I did get the opportunity to do some analysis while I was there. So there were some really interesting aspects. And because it was such a small office at the time, I had some incredibly unique opportunities there. And it was a lot of fun. It was hard. I know sometimes people have the perception that when you go overseas on a posting, it's like a diplomatic posting, it's the wine and cheese circuit, and it was definitely not that. But I learned an awful lot from being in that position about how the FBI works, how the intel works overseas, how we collaborate with other nation states. It was an incredible learning experience. So when my time there was up, I came back to the United States, but went to the FBI field office instead of headquarters. So I was at the FBI Miami office, and there again learned a tremendous amount. I got an opportunity to work on domestic terrorism issues. So what I thought I might be doing at the beginning of my career, I kind of did mid-career. And then we had kind of a transformation in the FBI where there was quite a bit of emphasis on developing intelligence capabilities. And they called it SET, for Strategic Execution Team. And part of that was implementing collection management. And so I had quite a bit of interest in collection requirements in the past. And so when the position came open, the very first position, I applied for it and became the collection manager for the FBI Miami office, which basically oversaw collection activity, collection management activity for all of the programs that the FBI did. So again, another really big learning curve at the beginning. And then I found out that, it wasn't just me that needed to learn about collection management. Many of the other folks in the FBI didn't know about it. A lot of the folks that had been in the military before joining the FBI were familiar, but some folks had never heard of it before. So that could be, that was a challenge, but a fun one, right?
So how did that actually, you said a lot of people don't know, and I'm guessing administration, leaders, managers around you are maybe those who didn't know, or am I assuming too much?
So the way that the FBI rolled out that strategic execution team, or SET, they brought in the senior leaders. So most of the senior leaders knew about it, certainly when they rolled it out in 2008. So, in fact, our deputy director at the time was the one who did a lot of the educating. So that showed how much investment that the C-suite equivalent of the FBI had in this project.
Yeah.
So those weren't so much the folks we had to kind of convince. It was more just your average collector, right? Because the agents typically thought of themselves as investigators, which is perfectly understandable, and that's a huge part of the position. But it also had this, intel component, and having them kind of embrace that intel side of things, was a little learning curve.
I can imagine. And what would you say is one of the success factors? I mean, we see some of the things you talk about now, right? On the private organization, they're going to start applying intelligence, maybe even a role of collection management. And it sounds like to me that because it was buy-in from higher up, it's easier perhaps to get it going? Or what was your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Having that buy-in from the folks on high was really essential for the success of the program. Having people understand what the role of intel was, and more specifically, the intel analyst was, really, really important. And, sometimes we learn together what things should look like. So, for example, I had one supervisor. So he was a supervisory special agent. And, we were talking about potential collection gaps for the fiscal year, right? So we had these, a list of the ones that, we had identified as outstanding collection gaps. And I said, okay, so, which ones do you want to focus on? And he said, you know what, let's shoot for the moon. Let's put all 25 of them in there. And I'm like, I didn't know better. And I'm like, okay, let's do it. Let's see what happens.
Go big or go home.
Go big or go home. Except for when you do that, you've got your focus kind of diluted over 25 different things instead of concentrated on maybe 5 things. And I learned pretty quickly that, depending on the resources that you had for that particular topic, you needed to scope how many things that you were prioritizing. Because if everything's a priority, everything is also trivial.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we learned together.
So when you started, you had no idea about intelligence, and you said, you're growing up with the FBI on this. What type of training or courses did you do, if you can talk about that?
Yeah. So we actually didn't have training at the beginning. I did go sit in with the national security part of the new agents training. Now that's all changed. So now there's really extensive training for analysts in the Bureau. But at the time, back in the day, there really wasn't, which is why having great mentors was so important. I was really fortunate to have people who would just kind of tell it like it was, and they didn't sugarcoat things. They were very specific about, what the expectations were. And these were folks who didn't have any intel training either. So they were people who learned on the job what their client needed, what kind of analytic support was actually going to be of value, and helped, me move forward in that direction. So I'm so appreciative of that. Again, things have completely changed, and now there's pretty robust training that I was actually really privileged to be a part of when I was in Miami. So I was an adjunct instructor down at Quantico for several courses. So that was one of the reasons that when I took early retirement, I wanted to continue teaching. So, which is how I ended up with First and Associates.
So did you teach at all in the Bureau, or? Yeah.
Yeah. So I taught, I actually helped develop a collection management. It's called Applied Collection Management course with some fantastic people who are still some of my best friends. And we were able to develop that class and teach it. And we taught several iterations every year, and it's still going strong. I know a friend of mine is still teaching one of the original, the OG. So it was a fabulous class. And then I also taught a class on critical thinking. So that's one of the ICAP classes, which is the U.S. Intelligence Community's Advanced Analyst Program. So it's a community-wide program that once you have a certain amount of time in as an analyst, you can join and get a certification. So it's an excellent program.
And there is this saying, right? Once you start teaching, you understand and appreciate the field of intelligence, in this case, much better. Did you have that same experience?
That, for sure, I did. There are so many times when I thought, gosh, I wish I had had this at the beginning of my career. It's funny because I read The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis by Dick Hoyer. And that book I should have read before I even applied or day one. I read it mid-career and just ate up every word. It's an older book. It's not like it's hot off the shelves or anything, but it just has so much great detail in it about how we think and how analysts can overcome some of the cognitive pitfalls that we're all subject to. It's a great book. I highly recommend that one. There are a lot of others out there, but that is the one. If I could recommend one book, it would be that one. There are plenty others that I would recommend after, but that's kind of the soul for me.
Oh, I totally agree. And when I first read it, I was also, already inside and working. I was like, why didn't anyone tell me about this?
I know.
And then I went through like a certain selection part, and then it was actually part of that training. So I was really happy because I read it and I was prepared then. So that was really good. So before we go into you going from, the FBI into the private sector, in that time, and I know a lot of things have changed since then, but what do you think, or what did you see then was some of the challenges of intelligence in the Bureau or in the intelligence community as a whole on the government side?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this is not going to surprise anybody, but one is just the overwhelming amount of data there is out there. And I was looking up how much information is on the internet now, and it's something like a number that I can't even pronounce. It starts with a Z, and
Setaflop or something.
yeah, zettabytes, or I mean, it's just tremendously huge. So that is really hard. If you have a limited amount of data, it's much easier to go through it. So that's a huge issue, because you can lose a needle in that haystack really, really easily. The other thing that's so interesting is how national security issues have changed over time. So we have when I entered into the Bureau, what I would have considered a national security threat or topic. But now we see things like climate change, like immigration. There are other things that have entered into kind of the national security realm that we just didn't think about before. And, that adds a lot of complexity to what folks in the intelligence community are having to deal with. There are new tools, which are great. And the individuals that I know that work in the intelligence community are incredibly resilient. So that is a huge benefit for the community. But it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. And because there's a lot of classified data, some tools are not applicable to in a classified environment. So there are a lot of challenges out there for sure.
And we deal with some of those challenges to this day, even in this course, where we're training them on how to apply critical thinking and SATs, structured analytical techniques. And as for those of you who are watching the video in the background, you see a lot of their work on only 2 days of work from the students. Some of them, throughout the trainings we've done over the years, some of them can't use certain tools. A lot of the tools, actually, now with AI and other tools that we can use to collaborate on. In the private sector, we can, but still we have to be certain that the data we're sharing isn't, either a classified or TLP red, we call it there. But we see the same things even still today, and that's I think that's always going to be a challenge until we solve the whole how can we work with tools on the high side and still protect the integrity and the safety of the data.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of innovation to be done on both sides, so I expect that to just increase, but it is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a challenge.
So how did you decide, or why? What drove you, if you will, to go from FBI, take an early retirement, you said, and sort of look at the outside and smell the flowers?
So I actually did a structured analytic technique to decide whether I wanted to take early retirement or not. So I used something called the 6 Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono, he's a thinker about creativity. And, he has you look at the same problem from many different aspects, which are represented by the different colored hats. And, in the end, it was clear to me that it was the right time to do it, both and I loved my job. When I left, I cried all the way home. Like when I was driving home, because I loved the mission. I loved the organization. I loved the people. But I've never regretted it. So it is nice to be able to, choose my schedule a bit more. Very frankly, it's nice not to have to think about bad guys every single day of my life, which is what many people in the intelligence community have to do. And there's quite a burden there. So it is refreshing to not have some of the stresses that I had during my time at the bureau. So it was the right time. The stars aligned, and they had offered the early retirement, and it just happened.
And did anything when you sort of quit and you sort of landed on your feet and you got a job, what surprised you then? Or did anything surprise you, I'd rather say? The differences between sort of the government work and now the private sector.
Yeah. So I think part of it is that First and Associates is a very special company in that when I joined, it was owned by Randy and Kathy Ferson. So obviously family-run business. Their son worked in the business, and very tight-knit, very committed to values, their company values. And it was a real joy working with Kathy and Randy, both of whom are highly recognized in the field of intelligence. Both of them had been intelligence officers with the CIA. So, really great opportunity. We had a lot of fun just talking about concepts and, talking about thinking. And that was a wonderful kind of change from, a time where there was a lot of pressure and stress to, deadlines, to where you had time to kind of sit back and do some meta thinking, thinking about thinking. So yeah, that was a huge difference. And the FBI is a very monolithic organization. It's very hierarchical. There's some good reasons for that, but it was a big culture shift for me to be able to, just call Randy and say, "Hey, what do you think about that?" I probably wouldn't have been able to do that with the director of the FBI. So yeah, there were a lot of big changes, and for the good. I really appreciated that.
So working for the Fursons, you taught intelligence, and I guess both to the government side and some to the private sector. And when you started teaching, how has your teaching, do you think, helped the private sector understand intelligence better than before?
Well, so a lot of the folks in the private sector that we've taught are cyber analysts. And my experience has been that the cyber analysts get a lot of training on cyber. They don't get so much training on analysis. So they got like the cyber part down, but they need some extra support on the analysis side. And they're very open to it, I've found, and actually kind of seek out those conversations about it. But there just aren't a lot of opportunities for them to get that just kind of analytic basis. And so I've really appreciated that. We sometimes we hear from people afterwards, and that's always a pleasure. But we see products that some of those folks have generated, and you think, oh, I see some good analytic tradecraft in that piece, and that's always a pleasure.
So teaching for the cyber people is one side, but you also teach to the government side. What do you say? What would you say are the biggest differences between teaching now as an external to the government side, but also to cyber people in the private sector?
Yeah, it's interesting because on the government side, most of the folks that I've taught are are working kind of traditional threats. So in some ways, it's a lot more comfortable for me and perhaps for them too. I'm not sure, but there is, there is a shared understanding there, and and to some degree, I kind of miss that when I'm with the folks that have been government, because I think like they do, right? The training standards are similar. The Analytic Tradecraft is based on the Intelligence Community Directive 203, the ICD 203. So we have this kind of shared language already. So in some ways, it makes it easier because we, have that kind of norm, a baseline, a shared baseline, which I don't often get with the cyber analysts. But at the same time, sometimes you can get too comfortable, right? And so it prevents you from kind of digging a little deeper. So I have to kind of remind myself, hey, let's not take the shallow road here. Let's make sure that we're digging into this. And so it's a really different experience teaching the folks on the government side versus the private sector.
Yeah, and I have the same experience when I go back into the service and teach there. There's a different focus because it's really clear who the enemy is, if you will. It's
that too.
On the tactical level, it's really clear, and on the strategic level, there are other types of analysis we do. But it's still interesting when we go into cyber and private sector. Still, the maturity level of doing critical thinking, using and applying intelligence methodology, as you said, before, the training just isn't there. And the training that is there is very shallow. The training I've seen is, this is intelligence cycle, these are the 4 steps, this is what it is. Now let's quickly move on to whatever topic I really enjoy, like OSINT or like some technical thing here. And that's usually the extent of the critical thinking, except for the SANS FOR 578, which is the CTI course, the Cyber Threat Intel course.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that one because half of the course is critical thinking using ACH and analysis of competing hypotheses. And the other half is more, how do we do all the collection? How do we apply different methodologies like the kill chain and the cyber kill chain and diamond model, et cetera, to figure out and solve problems.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that course, but that's there are far in between those type of courses.
Yeah, and I find that most of the folks that are teaching cyber analysis type of, the analysis part to cyber students are cyber experts who have been given this as kind of an additional duty. And so it's not their first love, So sometimes that shows. At least that's what I've heard from students. So
yeah, same. But you teach more now, right? So you mentioned, we're going to talk about the IAP in a moment, but I want to talk a little bit more. You mentioned ICD 203. What is that?
So that is a directive from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence that basically outlines the analytics tradecraft that government analysts should be following. So there are quite a few of them in there, and it ranges from things like objectivity to really specific things like, we want you to include an analysis of alternatives, right? So there's a wide, variety of things that are in there, but they're all expectations of the behavior and analytic tradecraft of an analyst. And it's another thing I wish I'd read right at the beginning of my career. Of course, it didn't exist back then, but it's good reading. Even if you aren't a U.S. based, analyst, it is interesting to look at the tradecraft and those expectations of analysts because they apply across the board.
And I'm guessing you're not going to be surprised by this, but in the private sector, there is no directive per se. There is no common understanding of how we should do things. And usually I tell people who want to learn about intelligence to read the COIR, of course, and also go in and look at the ICD 203 to get an understanding of what it is, and then start diving into stuff that you find interesting. And one of them I really enjoy is part of the writing. And if I remember correctly, you teach both a basic and an advanced course in writing. And the first one, the basic one, is the 203 more or less, or?
Yeah, so the fundamentals of analytic writing is really based very closely on ICD 203. So we really go through each of those analytic standards to make sure that people are aware of them, they understand them. We also talk about the review process, because a lot of people, they finish writing, they're like, okay, I'm done. No, you're not done. So it has kind of both of those components in it. I think we've gotten really good feedback about that basic writing class, which again, we call Fundamentals of Analytic Writing.
And then there is the advanced course.
Yeah, so there's an
if I remember
advanced...
correctly, there's no writing per se in the basics, right?
No, there's a little bit,
Yeah.
but it's mostly to get you to understand what good analytic tradecraft looks like, so you recognize it. We do a lot of exercises, so it's not like you're just getting, somebody's reading the ICD 203 to you. But if you really want to get into the, hey, I'm producing a product kind of course, it would be the advanced writing workshop. So that's where we kind of, like a good analyst does, we kind of do the decomposition. So we look at the different parts of a great analytic product, and we start slow and we just kind of build up to the full analytic product, which you should be able to walk out of the class with.
And then bring home to the office and actually start applying or using that knowledge. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And there's a lot of feedback from the instructors. It's very much of a dialogue. And it's a lot of work for the instructors to provide all of that feedback, but I know that for me, when I was kind of growing up as an analyst, that was one of the most important things, is getting that feedback. Because if somebody didn't understand what I was saying in my product, it wasn't on me to convince them that they understood, or on them. It was on me to change my writing so that it was easily understandable to anybody.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. One of my writing instructors called it effortlessly comprehensible, so you don't have to read the sentence 2 or 3 times to get what the heck somebody is saying.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm guessing, since your forte, if you will, from the FBI was collection management, do you also teach something about collection?
Not at the moment.
What?
I love collection management, and I would love to teach another course about it. But right now, we don't quite have the demand for that. I wish there were more collection managers in the world, because everybody, in a way, is a collection manager. Mm-hmm. Because everybody is looking at the data that they have, trying to figure out, does this actually meet the needs that we have? And then trying to figure out how to get more data if it doesn't meet the needs. Yeah. So we're all collection managers. And
we see that in private sector, right? We're not an agency. We're not geared towards doing an intelligence, practice. So I'm a one-man army often. I do the direction, I do the collection, I do the analysis, processing and analysis, writing the report, and having a colleague reading it and then ripping it apart, and then I rewrite and fix everything so it's easily readable and understandable. Yep. And then presenting and doing everything, then correcting the process, maturing, learning all the time. And I think that's what a lot of cyber people and a lot of people in the private sector are. The one-man army type of approach.
Yep.
So I think collection management, yes, we all are it, but that's just one small part of it.
Sure.
Perhaps, yeah. So when you now have some experience teaching intelligence in the private sector, what do you think are both the challenges and opportunities in using and applying intelligence in the private sector?
So certainly, private sector companies recognize that they should have an intel component. Like, if you look back a few years, I'm not sure every company would be like, oh yeah, we've got an intel component, or we're getting intel. I think really increasingly companies understand, hey, there is a role for Intel in pretty much every company, certainly in every sector. So, so there's that aspect. We have also already seen companies decide that AI will take the place of their analysts, their human analysts. And I think there's going to be a learning curve there because I think it will become apparent. I don't know how soon that will take place, but I think it will become apparent that humans are still good to have around, right? So having a human analyst is not an unnecessary burden because we have AI that could do all of that stuff. So I think we'll see a change there. Not sure when that's going to happen. I do know that a fair amount of private companies have a reliance on cybersecurity companies that are feeding them information. And there are a couple of concerns that I have about that. One is that I don't feel like it's very transparent what the sources of that information is or are. So I'm a little concerned about, people citing the cybersecurity firm as the source, but of course they're getting it from somewhere. So kind of tracing the chain back, I think is a little concerning.
Yeah.
The other thing, actually, I learned from you is that the reach of certain cybersecurity firms, they'll have an area, an interest where they're collecting information and providing it, but it's not like global. So if you sign up for just one kind of data feed, you don't know how much of the picture you're getting. You don't know if it's 1% or 80%. And that makes a big difference, right? In terms of, how confident you are in the kind of analysis that you would be doing from that data that you're receiving.
And this is something we see a lot where those who do cyber analysis, they have maybe one source from one vendor who are very centric on certain problems. And if you've chosen that vendor because that is your problem, that's great as a starting point. But now you're touching into the intelligence tradecraft, the critical thinking, the looking into the sources and the validity of the information, and how are you going to trust this information when you don't know where that vendor got it from because it's their secret sauce and we can't tell you, but trust us. And those create a little problem. So lately I've been talking a little bit about how to apply or at least be more critical on the sources and information we use. And well, we can talk about more about that later, but that's the admiralty scale. How do you think, after all this, the one-man army is working in the private sector, he's doing all these things, how can he or she or they demonstrate value to the business, to the guys who are actually funding that function?
Yeah, so I think I think actually we share this particular viewpoint is that when you are providing analysis, you provide options, right? So when you highlight a problem, a threat, when you come to your decision maker, you don't just come describing the problem. You come talking about the lessons learned, kind of analytic lessons learned by others. You think about, all right, how should we move forward? So for me, it's that forward lean, not forward look. So we're not like looking into the future necessarily 10 years from now, but we're looking at, all right, what can we do now to make ourselves more secure? What can we do now to mitigate threat? Making sure that you come with that. You're not just describing what happened, right? Oh, the bad guys did this. Okay. So what do we need to know from that to make things better? That I think is a critical piece that tends to be missing. And that's when you move from kind of that tactical piece into more operational and strategic level analysis, which is really tactical. I'm not saying anything bad about tactical. We need tactical. It's very important. It's very foundational. But really, a mature intelligence program has all three levels, right? You're not just stuck in the tactical, the tyranny of the urgent, we tend to call it. So, so that's one thing I would.
So we touched upon a few things now. First, some companies are saying, it's strategic, operational, and tactical. I think you and I share that view. And others will say, it's strategic, tactical, and then operational, where the more the technical things are. So everyone understands when we talk about tactical, for us, it's strategic, operational, tactical. Another thing you mentioned was the forward-leaning versus forward-looking. Can you sort of talk a little bit more about the differences?
Yeah. So forward-looking, in analysis, we do look at the future, right? So we look at potential trajectories where something might occur. And that, we're talking maybe 3 years down the pike, depending on what the threat is. So some threats evolve in a slower way than others. So, cyber, like long term, might be 2 years, whereas in some other more traditional intelligence threats, that might be a much longer kind of time frame. But that to me is forward looking. So you are using foresight or insight into the drivers for various, those forces and factors that can shape what the future looks like. And you're trying to come up with some alternatives that are in the realm of the possible or plausible, maybe even, for the future, what that future looks like. That's, for me, that's the forward look. So because we're actually looking into the future. The forward lean is that whatever analysis that you do, that you should be able to take something from it and learn from it and do something better now. That's, we talk about actionable intelligence. So that's what that means, is that we, even if you're describing something that happened in the past, that you take from that and you use it going forward. So that, for me, is that forward lean.
Yeah, and to me, when I started working in the private sector, I worked in cyber and in finance, and I was always surprised by the focus on being reactive, right? All the things that happened, and they were summarizing all this beautiful report of all the things that happened, but there was no focus on the so what, what are we going to do about it? What decisions are we going to make with this? How can I help you make better decisions, reduce uncertainty, put you in a better place to make the good calls whenever something happens in the future? And the forward leaning to me is, although all those things happen, you can't go back and make a decision then. You're making a decision from now and going forward.
Exactly.
So the forward leaning to me makes so much sense. Yeah. And the actionability of that. And I think it's become a buzzword where everything has to be actionable. Well, basically you have to make decisions off of it. It has to be relevant to the stakeholder or the decision maker. So let's jump into the field of AI. So I'm just going to, for the listeners and for us, for us now, we have AI as like the big topic. Within it, we have machine learning, and there's another field called LLMs, or large language models. And a lot of people these days, when they talk about AI, they actually talk about LLMs. And I just want to be clear, when we talk about it today, whatever you say it is, that's what we're going to talk about. But to me, at least, LLMs to me are, yes, it's AI, but it's not AI. It's a small portion of it. So when you talk about AI, what do you think then?
All right. So when it comes to AI, I'm one of those lurkers who I see really interesting pieces on AI, and there are certain things that really intrigue me. And getting through the data is a big part of that, because there's so much data out there, and to have, the AI partner is incredibly helpful. However, I am concerned about a lot of things, but two that come to mind. One is the sourcing, right? So, as a collection manager, as an analyst who tries to practice good tradecraft, sourcing is, one of the most important of those analytic tradecraft standards. And when I get stuff back from I don't know what the source of that is. Now, I have seen some improvements on that. And sometimes you have to kind of wade through other stuff and you can find where it was sourced from. But, until AI can actually come up and give me like the confidence that they have in that source, they can give me source descriptors that are meaningful. I feel very skeptical about getting big data because I just don't know where it's from. And, if you're kind of scraping the web, you just don't know what you're going to scrape off. And that's really, really scary as an analyst.
That brings us into a little bit of the bias of the data and the bias of the scraping and all the things that it's gathering. How can we untrain certain parts of it? I'm still trying to figure out and researching AI later, but that's going to be part of my PhD anyway. But this is to me a little concerning, at least for the limited knowledge I have so far.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's the second thing that for me, really scares me. It's the training of AI. And is it too late? I think about, we have already seen bias trained into AI. So if you think about in the United States, you fill out a form to get a mortgage. And before that application ever gets to a human being, AI goes through, and if there are mistakes, spelling mistakes, for example, it's put in the automatic decline pile. What does that do? Well, if you don't have a lot of education, if you are not a native English speaker, if you have some kind of learning disability, all of a sudden you are no longer in the running. That's problematic. And I realized that I do it, each of us does it ourselves too. So I don't know if you noticed, but a while back, you'd put in a search term and AI would produce something, and then you would get, hey, was this helpful? So that is you training the AI. This is what I want to see. So the next time, what are they going to do? They're going to come back with what they think you want to see. And they'll ask you again, hey, was this helpful? Yes, it was. This aligns perfectly with what I think.
Your own private echo chamber.
We call that confirmation bias, right? So there are some real issues about AI out there and the training of AI. And it is completely opaque. I have not seen anywhere where it says, hey, here's how we trained our AI. And frankly, at this point, it's probably too late. It's probably already integrated a lot of those cognitive biases because who trains them? Human beings. What do we have? We have cognitive bias. So, that is really scary for me. Now, do I think that, that means that AI is useless? Absolutely not. I think there are tons of ways that we can, use AI, but I just think we need to be really careful and we need to be more transparent about how AI is scraping, where it's scraping from, how we're training it in our everyday lives. Because I think it just doesn't occur to them that that's what's happening.
Yeah. And with the LLMs now, right? To me, I think a lot of people misunderstand what the LLMs are and what it does. It based on all the history and all the tokens you're giving it and all the words, it's not assessing, that's actually giving it cognitive abilities. It's calculating statistically the next word to form a sentence. And by chance, it's actually correct. It doesn't know that something is right or wrong until we tell it, right? We're still learning it or teaching it these things. And if you ask an LLM, how did you get to this answer? It's not going back and looking retrospectively what it did. It's going to generate new text based on the context of its previous answer and the new question. So it's not telling you what it did. It's just generating new text.
That's really
the
interesting.
feature. It's generating text based on input
Yeah.
to simulate and emulate a human for us to, look at it and go, oh, that's a really good answer. And the scary part is people are starting to make decisions out of this. And I'm like, for small decisions, maybe not that important, but for big decisions, maybe it's going to be a problem. We've seen multiple cases of lawyers, writing briefs and using AI, and then the AI generates new stuff. That brings me to another problem where we don't know when it adds stuff, we call it hallucinating, or combines stuff that is irrelevant, or removes stuff that is irrelevant. So if I, as an Intel analyst, tells it to ask, hey, can you write a summary about this threat or summary about this incident? Use these 3 reports. Unless I've read every single word of those reports, I would never know if it adds, combines or removes stuff that is really important. And then if it makes an assessment, it looks really well. But I've learned that if I know the material, I see the mistakes pretty quickly. But for someone who hasn't bothered to read the material or aren't familiar with the data set, they are going to send off something that is wrong. And for intelligence analysis and for a lot of people who use it for critical stuff, I am starting to get a little worried. But I might be the old man in a peanut gallery, in a Muppet Show, and just, it was colder before and better before, and it was hurting more before. But it might be the case. But I use AI for a lot, but I tend to lay off the sauce, if that makes sense, when I do critical stuff, when I do my analysis.
Yeah, the whole hallucination thing. When I first learned about that, I'm like, wait a minute, what? And I think one of the scariest parts is that it sounds good, So there aren't red flags that come up immediately. So you'd be like, oh, wait a minute, whoa, that's just wrong. And because of that, it's very seductive. Oh, I get an answer like that, and sounds good. So let's go with that. And, we talk in class, right, about system 1 and system 2 thinking. The system 1 being the fast and easy. This is from Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Fast and easy, it's very intuitive. It's kind of go with your gut, versus system 2, which is, really very deliberative. It's when you take your time, when you process data. We're doing a lot of system 1 thinking these days. And it's very tempting to think, well, I'm going to let AI go through all the data and do all the system 2 thinking. But it's not actually doing the thinking. So that's another kind of temptation of AI that we really need to be careful about.
If and when the LLMs can say, hey, we are going to be 97% correct, I'm fine with using it to do summaries of data sets and using it for collection. Not sure yet. I'm still on the fence of how it's supposed to be used for the critical thinking and the SATs and stuff, because that's a human aspect. Are we saying that we are going to apply, let's say, an ACH through the LLM, but it doesn't think? It's actually generating text. So I'm not sure how that applies in that way. But could it be like a co-pilot, if you will, like an assistant that, like the intern who doesn't know anything? Yes, you can have it could do certain things for you really quickly and really well, but certain things you cannot and should not let it do. But this will change. And as I'm saying, if it gets into this 97 percentile, then I'm going to be happy with, using it for certain things. But I still want to have the hand on the wheel, so to speak, to be able to control when it does what and where.
One of the things that I think it probably can do pretty well now is creative thinking, which I know sounds kind of crazy. But the fact that AI doesn't have the preconceived notions of what is possible or okay means that it doesn't have limits on putting pieces together in wild and wacky ways that, we as humans might do. So I have seen some pretty interesting kind of possibilities on the creative thinking side, which does seem kind of ironic because it's not really thinking, it's just putting things together. But there are some experts in creative thinking that have said in the past that, really nothing is new under the sun. It's just how you put those pieces together. So if AI can do it in kind of novel ways, why not? Why not use it that way?
Yeah, and that's a good side of it. How about, you mentioned it, the WEPs, the words of estimated probability, and that is based on, what did the source say? Do we trust the source? What is the information? Can we confirm the information? And then we make some assessment, and we will use words of estimated probability. Now, what are your experiences there?
In terms of AI?
Yeah.
Oh,
or
yeah.
LLMs in this case.
Yeah, I have never seen kind of the LLM produce something that I understood in terms of the WEPs, the words of estimated probability. You have to think carefully about how you come up with those confidence levels and the likelihood. And I just haven't seen that work yet. Have you?
No, and I wanted to ask you before I went on a rant. I'm going to do a rant again.
Okay, all right.
No, so I've been testing it, and we meet the same problems I mentioned before. It's either adding something, combining something, or excluding something. And when it makes, it writes an assessment. When you read it, you go, "This is really good." I mean, you could almost pass it off as as a part of a report. However, it's saying likely is something, but the data isn't there. There's no mention in the report about that, whatever they're saying is likely. And that scares me, right? Because if I didn't read the reports, maybe 10, 15 reports that I can send in and sort of, hey, based on this, what are your assessment? And it can give me an assessment with likely this or highly likely that. But it's not part of the report. And I would never know unless I knew the source material intimately. That scares me. But I'm saying, I'm going back now to the, once it gets into the 93 and 97 and above, we're way beyond what humans can do. So I could at some point start trusting it. So we're going to move into a little question I usually ask all my sort of visitors or guests.
Yes.
If anyone wants to start working in intelligence, what would be your advice? What should they know? What type of education or not, and skills, language? What do you think would be needed today to start working in intelligence?
So, I know there's some very fine institutions out there that offer degrees in intelligence. And, I think that's great. I personally think that having a real variety of background experiences strengthens an organization's intelligence program. So, I wouldn't say, hey, you got to get out there and, study Intel. I would say read that Psychology of Intelligence Analysis, because I think that is a really great book. But I think you can successfully, and I've seen it, be an intelligence analyst from a multitude of different walks of life. I do think that there are three things that most intelligence analysts do and do fairly well. One is think. So having that intellectual curiosity, really thinking things through, enjoying that process of thinking, thinking about the decomposition and then, the synthesis, getting insight from that. The next thing is writing. So usually analysts need to write, and they need to write well. Communications, if you've got great thoughts and they're all in here and nobody gets to hear about them, that's a problem. So writing, I think, is another real strength. So focus on getting your writing, getting a solid base in writing. And then lastly is presenting. So briefing, making presentations, getting used to, that style of oral communication, I think is really important. So you don't burn, crash and burn like I did on my first presentation. Those are three things that pretty much every analyst should be able to do. But you can do that, as you're going through, school, college, university. You can do that in pretty much any field. But just making sure that you excel in those kind of three domains, I think, is important.
Throughout your career, you probably had, and everyone else I've talked to, someone who meant something to you in terms of giving you good advice or telling you about something that later, oh, that was actually really good advice, and I actually that changed the trajectory of my life. Except for your father, who kept pushing you to do intelligence. I think I see what he's trying to do, but we'll talk about that later. So, any other person in your life that made a significant impact on your decisions?
Actually, there were lots.
Same.
And I am so grateful to have had such fantastic people kind of helping me along the way, because there were times that it was really hard. Right? One of the best pieces of advice I got when I was very new was keep it to 2 pages. So I was in the middle of writing my dissertation, which was, at the time, maybe 150 pages. So I was used to writing really long stuff. And I know it doesn't sound terribly profound. Just keep it to 2 pages. But I realized that what that person was really telling me was, you have to make sure that the client is the first thing you're thinking about. Who is going to read this? Who is the person who you are trying to communicate your analysis to? And, at the time I was writing for special agents of the FBI. And I had been told that, nobody's going to read anything over 2 pages. Now, that's not actually true. There are plenty of agents out there that will, read voraciously. But I took it to heart, hey, be concise. Don't just write to write. You're not there to show off how smart you are with your big words. That's not what it's about. It's about communicating your analysis to a person who can actually make use of it. And that's what it's all about. So that's not exactly what was relayed to me, but I got the message. That was it. Think about that client first. That's number one.
That's some of the things we teach in the training we do here too, right? It's the understand your audience. Who are you writing for? What is the actual question you're trying to answer? What is the message? How are you going to convey that result? And then what is the storyline? How are you going to communicate this? How are you going to help them and guide them through all this complex material? And how to keep it short, concise. And all of those things really, really matter. And I get that. And that also helped me when I learned that the hard way as well, through doing and getting ripped apart by the team, right? Where they, this is wrong, and this is right, or this isn't correct, and you miss, everything under the sun was up for scrutiny. Yeah. I learned so much about it, but also I learned how to talk about the product. It isn't about me. So when you get those feedbacks and people tell you, do 2 pages, don't write that, do that. It's about the product. It's about adjusting so the material ends up being read, understood, internalized, and then people use it to make decisions. That's the goal. It's nothing to do with me and my feelings. That took a long time. Not a long time, but it took a little while to get that.
That too is another piece of great advice was, when you write something and you're asking somebody to review it for you, don't pick somebody who writes just like you do, because they'll probably miss the things that you did and pick up and congratulate you on the things that you think you did well. So, make sure that you pick somebody who writes differently, who thinks differently than you do. It's funny because I have a friend who's a really outside the box thinker. He used to drive me absolutely crazy because we had these discussions and, we come to an impasse, but I needed that. I needed to have somebody challenge me and say, well, what about this? And I don't see why you're, not doing that. And because then you have to come back and you have to defend yourself. And way better to have that conversation with him than my supervisor or my supervisor's supervisor. So there have been a lot of people who've helped out along the way.
Yeah.
I've really appreciated.
Yeah, same. So we are in Copenhagen, and we've been here now for 2 days together, teaching the IAP. What is the IAP?
The IAP is, this is actually a compressed IAP. So the program, the Intelligence Analyst program, is a certification program that's offered by First and Associates along with your company. And it's basically was certified by IAFE, which is the International Association for Intelligence Educators. And it is an association that's kind of looked through the material, made sure that it kind of meets certain standards and says, yep, this is what we want analysts to learn. And it's a 3-step process. So level 1 is critical thinking. So you go through a critical thinking fundamentals class. That's a 3-day class. And for this compressed class that we're teaching together, we look at 3 different families of structured analytic techniques. And I just have to give a shout out to Kathy Ferson, who came up with the term structured analytic technique, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and we talked about it during the interview together.
Yeah.
So she's going to talk more about that in that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So in this class, we do exploration SATs, which is basically where you're kind of discovering the data. Then we do diagnostic SATs, which we've just started on today, which is a lot of fun. We're manipulating the data, kind of developing hypotheses. And then the final one is foresight SATs or FSATs. And that's really where we look at those key drivers that point us in a particular set of trajectories for the future. So that one's a lot of fun. It's hard work. There's a lot of brain drain going on during the class, but it's a lot of fun. And then finally, the last part of the program is level 3, and that's where we do presentational tradecrafts, because we talked about, if you can't actually communicate the analysis, doesn't really count. So making sure that you can communicate what you've come up with, those analytic conclusions in an effective way to support your decision maker. So those are those 3 levels.
Yeah, and we have actually adapted it to cyber as well. So we're using cyber scenarios. We're using two different scenarios over those 11 days.
Yep.
So it's interesting to see. And you mentioned one thing, or you mentioned a little bit, is the cyber people usually have a tendency to have the logs, to have the data, so they can sort of write a beautiful story about what happened, how it happened. When we move away from the data and more into the conceptual, they don't have the data, and that's when we get into the foresight, and they don't get a headache, they get a brain ache because it's a different way of thinking, and they don't have the data, and they're twisting their mind, and so it's fun, but also really rewarding to see the change of thinking, and sort of on day 4 or 5 of the SAT, the middle course. That's when they get the aha moment. The light bulb goes on.
Yeah.
So this is what it's about. This I'm excited now. I'm going to take it home with me. I'm going to use it. And we see that on every training we do, and I think that's the most rewarding part.
Yeah, that's the best when they actually say, you know what, I'm going to use this on this, and I can see how this will apply, because that's the whole point, right? Is to actually apply those SATs or apply that critical thinking or the presentational tradecraft into your daily work to make it better.
Yeah.
So
and
we
we
love
used
that.
a certain book, right, by Hoyer and Ferson. So Randy Ferson wrote the book together with Hoyer, the Structured Analytical Techniques. To many, and I'll put a link in the description, but to many, that's sort of the big book, the book of intelligence. What are your experiences with the book? Because I know you also supported with perhaps upgrading and doing the new versions and stuff.
Yeah, so we're looking at doing a few updates to we call it the SAT Bible, because it has I think it's 66 techniques in
Yeah, in the
it.
current version 3, it's 66. Yeah.
Yeah. And there may even be another one that appears next time, which is going to be fun. So, it's a great reference point where, if you, I know that when I was in the Bureau, there are some times when I thought I was doing the technique right. And then I learned how to really do it and thought, gosh, I wish I had known, because that would have enhanced what we were doing. Not that it was bad, but it could have been improved if I had done, step 4 that I forgot. So that's really helpful. It's a great reference book. There's also the little handbook that has, kind of a condensed version, which is much, much smaller, but it can be a quick reference if you've kind of need a little refresh on something.
And the handbook contains the most popular, if you will, most used techniques and maybe a little shorter description, not the background, how, why is it used this way, etc. That's in the big book. But I like it too, because I use it as a reference before training, but also when I do analysis. And it's a nifty little book to bring with you and have close by when you work on problems.
For sure.
Yeah. So we're getting to the end. Anything you would like to ask me that you think the audience would
So
find
you did a little teaser on the Admiralty scale. So
there we go.
Come on, let's hear a little bit more about that.
So what do you want to know about it? I mean, is there anything particular or?
What are the advantages?
So advantages. Okay. So for background, for those who are listening, on SANS.org, I wrote a blog post together with a guy called Sean. He's one of the authors of the SANS FOR 589, the Cybercrime Intelligence course. So I took the course a while back when they were doing in beta still, and we got to talk. And they were using the Admiralty scale, or they were talking about how to assess the sources. That was really important, but they didn't have a model connected to it. And I say, hey guys, what about the Admiralty scale? So we decided to write a blog post to enlighten the cyber people on how they should be more critical of the sources they use and the information they get from those sources. So the Admiralty scale has a long history. I'm not going to talk all about it right now, but the key elements that I find interesting here is that when you look at sources, it is important to look at the source's ability to understand the material that they are producing.
Sure.
They have to be able to explain and articulate what they saw and what they thought about it in that sense. And we as analysts, we have to be critical about sources, because how can we confirm what we're reading from that source is true? How can we confirm or not, or disprove, if that matter, whatever that person or that entity is sharing with us is something that person actually knows, right? It's not trying to fool us. So there's multiple aspects there, but that's sort of one side of it. The other side, which, and I have to say that we separate the two of source and information. We assess the source on its own, its history, its credibility over time. Have we seen any indications in prior communication or prior reporting, attempts to be dishonest or, not being correct, lying, or perhaps even being, ignorant? Or have they over time been consistent and are they often aligned with other, good sources that are also credible? And the information, we do a separate analysis on that. Is this information correct? Can we look at other sources that can confirm this? They have to be independent sources that says some of the same things. Is the information, there are multiple grades to this. I can't remember all of them, but we use what we call A1 to F6. So the sources says A, B, C, D, E, F, and then the information is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the A and A1, that's usually set up for sources that we have over time, we trust. They have given us really good information. It's solid year over year over year, or time over time over time. So usually that's a rare grading to get the A. And the 1 is when we can collaborate information from multiple independent sources, and over time we see that this source has actually been providing the A1 over time. all the way down to F6, where we haven't assessed it yet, or we can't. It's impossible for us to assess it right now. And there's a graded scale to this. I think the biggest upside to it is that we can actually go back when we make an assessment, and we use words of estimated probability. We can go in and look at multiple sources that we have used to be able to say this is likely or this is unlikely. We can actually go back and track, which sources said what information validity did we get to that. So if it was a B2 or a D5, if all of them were really shady sources that we can confirm, and usually those sources lie or manipulate, then maybe we could say it's likely. And then we get into the confidence level. So what is our confidence on our assessment? Then that's where the Analytic scale really kicks in, because now we're looking at the information and the source, and do we trust them or not? And we look at all of them, right, in context of that assessment. So I think it's an interesting model or framework to use. It's used by NATO. It's been used for decades. Yes, it maybe isn't relevant to some people, but I find it really, really relevant for my work when I do assessment. I read a lot of reports from different vendors, and I always try and put the scoring on their reporting, because, they haven't referenced anything, automatically low. Or they have reference, but the referencing really is bad because I can't find it. I can't find the sources because it's their secret sauce, if you will, right? Or they're making claims or making assessments, but the data doesn't support it. So that report from that vendor, I will then rate lower. Although perhaps in previous reporting they were really good, but on this specific topic they really sucked. So I have to assess this specific reporting lower and separate.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm probably butchering this explanation. Read the blog post and you'll probably get it more. So, what are the questions on this, or do you agree or disagree on this?
No, I think that's interesting. I mean, I can see the value in having, say, if you have a source that has proven consistent over time, but they're reporting on something they've never reported on before. So maybe they're an A3, something along those lines. I think I definitely see value in that.
Yeah. And just to clarify, so if we have a source that talks about topic A, and you give that like a B2 over time, but next suddenly there's a report on a different topic, that vendor or that source might be now a C4, because on this topic they're actually not that trustworthy because they're winging it a little bit, or they don't have the expertise to actually report on this. They're making some based on their experience, but they don't have the experience for it. So that's how we over time we look at a source, and over time maybe on a certain topic or a field, let's say cyber in a specific threat area, threats from a certain area, let's say in the eastern part of Europe, and then suddenly they start reporting on floods or about how someone might have started electrical fires in a power grid somewhere. Those are physical things. I'm not sure they are capable, skilled enough, or have the right sources to actually have other than just an opinion on it. So that means at that point, I would probably take that vendor for this topic a little lower than what they're usually reporting on.
What I really like about that is that it forces you to think each time about the same source, because it's so easy to say, oh, well, that source is reliable.
Yeah. It's a B2, so it's going to be B2 now.
Exactly. So that I do like that quite a bit. In terms of confidence, I like how, because certainly the data and the sources, both of those are really key elements. Another key element is the logic, whether this is actually a logical flow or whether you've had to make a lot of leaps in logic. That obviously would lower your confidence as well. But it's kind of handy to have at least two out of those three components built into your scale there.
And you have a different approach, I remember. And also we teach more the Ferguson way here in the course. Could you talk about how we deal with sources and information here?
Yeah, well, so there are, so many different things to think about in terms of the sources. And it used to be that, we thought about, sources in terms of, reliability and placement, and that's kind of it. And there's so many different aspects that really come into play when you're thinking about assessing a human source. There are other things that come into play when you're thinking about other kinds of sources. So we actually kind of divide up the different types of sources and assess them differently. So depending on what that source type is, and I won't go into the details there, but it's a more kind of refined way, a more critical way of really looking at whether you, you know, how far you want to trust a particular source, um, because there's so many questions about sources, and they're so inherent in thinking about, whether you have confidence in your analysis as a whole. If you don't have confidence in the sources, or if you haven't even thought about that, that's a problem for your
Yeah, and
analysis.
this is what I like about the approach we do in the IAP training, and just what you just said, but also the source summary, right? We have to write, and the reader has to understand what are we basing this on. So if we can't show and demonstrate, either the sourcing or let's somehow describing the source in a source summary type of text, so the reader can understand. So, okay, so we should trust this assessment or this conclusion a little bit more than if we had issues with, let's say, the sources that we're using. So that I guess that's the biggest part that's missing in the Admiralty scale, because I haven't found at least any documentation that includes that. So
Yeah, I love me a good source summary statement. Those are the best.
I agree. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being a guest. I really enjoyed having this conversation with you, and we're going to spend another couple of 3 days together to continue teaching the course. But still, I wanted to extend my gratitude for taking the time to sit down and talk with me.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Bye bye.